Today we want to talk about a frightening UN Cybercrime Treaty convention and what it might mean for us. Thanks for checking out this video by Switch to Linux. Today we do want to address some of the privacy concerns coming down the pipeline for the whole world. And will this impact the United States? Does it already? We're going to talk about this, and we're going to talk about what we can do about it and things like that. So if you like this type of content, please subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so. Hit that like and comment down below. Because what we're going to talk about today is this disturbing new rule being proposed by the UN. It will effectively expand the Five Eyes concept to all of the UN states, which includes a number of authoritarian regimes as well as other places that we may not all see eye to eye. In fact, the United States is one of the few that actually has constitutional protections that this treaty might run roughshod over. And we want to talk about that. And of course, the U.S. just signed off on it, at least in signing off in support. We're going to get into that more at the end of the video. But I do want to address what is going on here. And so with that, let's go ahead and dive on in. So the first thing we want to mention is I had said Five Eyes earlier, and you might say, that crazy conspiracy theorist, this is not a conspiracy theory. From the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, DNI.gov, which is a government organization, the National Counterintelligence and Security System. They have the Oversight and Review Council of the Five Eyes, Intelligence and Oversight Review. And they mention here what is the scope of the progress. So, of course, the office, let's see, does it actually have what they're trying to do? I think actually our signed document from all of the government agencies here probably gives us our best. So, in brief summary, however, the Five Eyes is a data collection between a variety of countries. We have Canada, Australia, I think the whole list is over here. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom, and United States. Those are the 5 countries that have agreed to share data back and forth to help in various intelligence agencies. Here is the signed council. This one's from 2017. Of course, there's history of this going back into it was either World War I or World War II is where the idea of this actually founded. And the whole scope of purchase, of course, exchange views on subject to mutual interest, compare best practices in review and oversight methodology, explore areas where cooperation on reviews and sharing results are permitted where appropriate, encourage transparency to the largest extent possible to enhance public trust, and maintain contact with political offices. So there's this, as I said, the 2017. So this is the one signed by all of the individual people, and this is directly on the DNI.gov site. So this is a government document. Wikipedia will have a lot of information and other resources going back in the history. So it traces back to World War II and an alliance between British and American code breakers to work together. And of course, now this has been expanded out into a variety. Here it's Australia, Canada, New Zealand, UK, and US. And so what we're seeing here is the purpose is data collection and data sharing between them. The challenge is that, as the Snowden revelations demonstrated, is that what they effectively were using this as was to spy on each other's citizens, because the United States has a constitution that we cannot spy on the citizens. But a UK government could spy on US citizens, and then US can spy on UK citizens, and then they can just share data on each other's citizens. Snowden revelations demonstrated that that was actually happening. And so it was a way for this organization to get around the constitutional protections afforded to the various nation states. Of course, privacy is a big thing in Australia, but, as long as it's not the Australian government doing it, well, they can just barter and trade that data. This goes into the history, which is not relevant here. I just wanted to mention some of the things that can happen here. And this is where they actually do have a treaty not to spy on each other's governments. However, they tend to do so. This is the Snowden disclosures showed us the strongly reduced CSIS for outsourcing surveillance of Canadians to overseas partners. So yes, they were actually spying on each other's overseas partners in order to collect data. And that is the type of stuff that we had found. There's a proposed 6 eyes, of course, coming in. Again, not related to what we're talking about here. The overall point that we wanted to make with 5 eyes is that it is a data cooperation. So what's going on here is the United Nations is working on a cybercrime treaty. Now, on the surface, a cybercrime treaty would be a good thing because we have massive amounts of spam calls here in the United States, but they're operating out of Mumbai, you know, and so there's nothing that can be done. Additionally, there's people that are going just outside the United States borders. You know, like I don't forget if Jamaica is United States territory or not. Just use that for sake of example, but they're just offshore engaging in all of this fraud and then stealing people's credit card numbers, not by stealing them, but by calling them with a call and then getting them involved in a timeshare and give us your credit card number. And then they charge like $990, what is $10 under the threshold for an immediate flag to look into. And so these countries are doing this, and there's nothing that can be done because there's no cross jurisdiction between them. I can be like, yeah, I can report to the police all they want. They're just going to say, well, it's overseas. There's nothing we can do. And so there is an element where something like this could be beneficial. The challenge is that the UN Summary and Cybercrime Treaty that they are putting together is woefully lacking. But this is a collaboration with all of the UN countries to effectively do the same things as the 5 eyes. They're going to collaborate data. They're going to collect and store and harvest and share any form of data that they possibly can. The biggest issue that I have with this is not in collaborating in some form of data to prosecute actual crime. My big issue is this goal's emphasis on pre-crime and prevention. Now, this is where those fundamental things, as me being an American, America is founded on these principles of privacy. It is founded on the principles of due process. It is founded on the principles of a person is innocent until proven guilty. And if you're constantly surveilling what they're doing in the background, that violates that fundamental cause. And so looking at the founding of the country, the founding fathers used encryption techniques to pass messages privately. They did not want big brother government involved in every element of their society, and they are probably all rolling around in their graves right now over the dystopian collection going on in our world. But like I said, and I'm going to focus primarily on the prevention and the pre-crime elements. Now, the text as ratified as of right now is 41 pages in length. I did not read every single word of it, but I did read quite a bit of it. I was looking for specific key elements. Of course, there's a bunch of definitions. What do these words mean? You know, and then you're looking at the general principles here. And I wanted to have a look at just a couple of the specific articles here. So Article 1A, promote and strengthen measures to prevent and combat cybercrime more efficiently and effectively. Article 3A is the prevention, investigation, and prosecution of criminal offenses established in accordance with a convention, including freezing, seizure, confiscation, and return of proceeds from such offenses. Again, I'm not concerned with a crime that has happened and collecting data. I'm concerned with the prevention, because this means that you are getting into encrypted technologies, you're spying on what's going on, you're doing a bunch of these things. Other articles, I'm actually going to cover. This one here is going to show up much later on in our discussions. We're going to cover it now. This is 6.2. 2. So remember this, this is the article that EFF is talking about a lot about, and as the various countries are discussing it, several countries, Iran was the leader in this, and 25 other countries, including Russia and China and Korea, were all trying to get rid of this language. Nothing in this convention shall be interpreted as permitting suppression of human rights and fundamental freedoms, including the right to be rights related to freedoms of expression, conscience, opinion, religious or belief, peaceful assembly, and association in accordance with a manner consistent with applicable international human rights law. Now, as of right now, that is still in there, but understand 25 countries want to remove that, and they're fighting to do so. So where I wanted to actually spend a lot of my time, like I said, because some of this is okay and I don't really mind, but what I wanted to focus on is the pre-crime portion, and that is in chapter 6. So we got to scroll down and find our chapter 6. Hopefully I didn't scroll past it there. I think that starts around Article 53. There it is. So Chapter 6 is their preventative measures. Specifically, I'm not going to read all of these, but I do want to highlight a few of them. Looking at Part 2, each state party shall take appropriate measures within its means and in accordance with fundamental principles of domestic law to promote the active participation of relevant individuals, entities outside the public sector, such as non-government organizations, civil society organizations, academic institutions, and private sector entities, as well as the general public in the relevant aspects of prevention of the offenses herein. Now, what this is effectively meaning is what we call the third-party doctrine. So the Constitution of the United States protects the government from spying on a United States citizen. However, with this massive proliferation of user accounts, social media, cell phones, and other things that requires you to agree to a terms of service, what we have is a circumstance where people are involved in these companies giving up all this data. The companies are storing such data, and then the government can just come in and ask for it. In some instances, buy it. There's laws right now being proposed that would get rid of the ability to buy and sell this data. But as of right now, it is still lawful for a government agency to purchase that data from a company. It's not violating, somehow it's not violating the illegal searches and seizures clause of the Constitution, because they're not doing it themselves. They're just purchasing data that somebody else did. That should be a clear violation, but there are bills right now looking to address such loopholes. The challenge is that many people are forced to use certain accounts. You know, go to a college these days, get a job these days. Your average job right now, you can't even go into a store. Like when I was young, I'd go into my first job. I walked into the front door of the Burger King. I said, "Can I have a job application?" They handed me a piece of paper. I filled it out. I handed it back. They called me and I worked at Burger King. All right. So looking at that, that's how it was. If you want to seek a job now, you're going to get onto various accounts. You have to agree to some app. You have to agree to all these terms and conditions, and they're going to collect and harvest your data. And then what are they doing with the data? Well, they're buying or selling it, or they're sharing it, or they're trading it. But every single organization has a clause that if the government comes and asks for a warrant, they can seize such data. Well, that even extends and includes into your Windows computer as of Windows 10, which will try and force you to sync all of your files to their cloud unless you take exorbitant efforts to get it to stop. And they have your data, they have your encryption keys. So even if they bust in your door, seize your computer, and your computer is encrypted, all they need to do is ask Microsoft for any information they have, and that includes the encryption keys that Microsoft has graciously backed up to your account inside of their cloud. And since, of course, they're trying to make it difficult to use your computer without having a Microsoft account, all this stuff is getting involved in here. This is where I have a serious problem with this portion, because they're talking about working with non-governmental, civil society, academic institutions, and private sector entities is what the text of this says. Well, that is exactly working with these organizations. Windows collects all this data. They're storing it on their clouds, and this can be used in a crime preventative measure. These types of things happen. This is why I have a big problem with recall forcing itself all over the place. But think about your work with Facebook and Google and Apple. I mean, talk about preventing crime, whatever else. Remember the case of the gentleman who, during the Koofy had to calls his doctor up and says, "Hey, my son has this rash in his nether regions." And the doctor says, "Well, take a picture of it and send it to me." He does that. The doctor says, oh, that's something simple. I sent you a prescription. Guy goes, gets a prescription, treats his child, and everything is fine. Until Google says, oh, look, nasty stuff on this guy's phone. And they call the local police based on, of course, his location data. And the police and CPS gets involved. Of course, because the police and the CPS, they are actually engaged in real life investigations. They go, he explains to the doctor. The doctor says, oh, that's exactly what I told him. Oh, yes, that's exactly the picture. The police say, okay, no problem here. So he's completely cleared. CPS completely clears him. Police completely clears him. Case closed. No big deal, except Google locked him out of his account. He lost all of his photos. He lost all of his contacts. He lost all of everything because Google is trying to, as a preventative agency, engage in pre-crime. I don't want these organizations having this in, and these measures are going to encourage and even in many instances enforce such a circumstance. We're going to come back to Article 3 in a moment because there's several of those points I want to talk about. Looking at 4, each state party shall take appropriate measures to ensure that relevant competent authority and authorities responsible for preventing and combating cybercrime are known and accessible to the public where appropriate. So, and then we're reporting, including anonymously, of any incident that may be considered a criminal offense. I'm having a problem these days with anonymous reports. And the reason I'm having a problem with this is because it's becoming too easy to anonymously report somebody for a crime that isn't happening out of being vengeful, because there's nothing that can cause havoc in somebody's life more than having an authoritarian police state come down on them because somebody did not like that individual and simply accuse them anonymously of a crime. This is, swatting is anonymously reporting a crime. That doesn't happen. Well, if you have a means to anonymously report all this kind of stuff, guess what? You're going to have a whole lot of people using the justice system in criminal means against other people. So I don't like the idea of having enforcing anonymous giving up of information. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to address every single sort. If I want to call in the police and say, I just don't want all this in the public record, I should have the right to contact the police and about some suspected crime. In fact, let me just use a real life example, because I was camping the other day. It was a beautiful place down in southern Ohio. And I'm walking back and I'm scoping out some of the side roads. And I walk down, there's a guy comes down in a big old truck and he's like, oh, I'm just out spotting deer, whatever. We have this very brief conversation. Well, it turned out he was actually out there to dump a bunch of garbage. Okay. And I didn't, it's a guy in a pickup truck with a trailer of stuff. I didn't think a lot of it. He could have been from this city, driving to this city. Oh, look, a little park. Let's go have a look. Well, as I'm walking down that road a couple days later, I noticed some roofing tiles on the side. Now, I saw some sticks, and I saw the sticks in the guy's back in his truck. I was like, why the guy dumping sticks there? And I see roofing tiles. I'm like, what? I look over the embankment, and he had dumped a whole bunch of crap down over his thing. So I'm like, not much I can do about it at this point in time. I remember what the guy looked like, sort of. I remember the truck, sort of. But I didn't have license plate numbers or anything like that. If I had that information, I would have called in a heartbeat and reported the guy, because I don't want those public lands that I make use of as a van dweller being closed down because some moron wants to come and dump his garbage rather than paying the dump $5. It's going to cost you $5 to put that stuff where it needs to be, in the local dump. Okay. And so I didn't have anything to do with it. Well, it turns out that the next day, the sheriff's office was coming down because, the forestry's they're making sure people have their permits and things. Okay. Well, the police come by and they park kind of next to me. I come out and I talk to him. I say, hey, just so you know, I saw a guy dumping, and I gave him a brief description of the vehicle, and I gave him a description of the guy, and I gave him the approximate time. So the sheriff said, yeah, well, if the forestry has cameras about who's coming and going, we can catch the guy with that information. Thank you. Now, if he would have asked me, can you provide information for our report? I would have gladly handed it over to him. Now, do I want that necessarily in the public newspapers? This guy, a van dweller, report? No, we should have the option to have that stuff out. But the police should know, or whoever you're reporting it to, if it is an actual crime that you're actually reporting, you should be able to report that. And I know you're going to give me some good reasons in the comments. Please give me those good reasons in the comments. But for the most part, I don't think we should be able to be completely anonymous in everything that we are doing. 5, of course, state parties shall endeavor periodically evaluating existing relevant national legal frameworks and administrative practices with a view of identifying gaps and vulnerabilities. So let's look for ways that we can shore up our pre-crime. Remember, this is all under prevention. These are not under crimes. These are under preventing cybercrimes. And the 6th one, they may collaborate with each other with relevant international and regional organizations in promoting and developing measures deferred to in this article for, again, prevention of cybercrime. This means spying. You're not going to prevent cybercrime without spying on people. Now, I did want to address some of these. Some of these are really actually good under the preventative measures may include. Some of these are fairly dystopian. Let's look at the bad ones first. 3A, strengthening cooperation between law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, and relevant individuals and entities outside the public sector, such as NGOs, civil society organizations, academic institutions, and private sectors. Same thing we talked about earlier. This is problematic because now you are engaging all of these in data collection to be a ward of the state. That is a serious problem. I have this one as kind of neutral, but leaning negative on part M, preventing and detecting transfers of proceeds of crime and property related to offenses. The problem I have with this is we have this very often abused thing in our world right now called civil assets forfeiture, where they seize a bunch of stuff, assuming it might be for a crime. But if you want to get that stuff back, you have to sue and prove that you're not actually committing a crime. That in and of itself, again, fortunately, we have some legislation coming out about that. Hopefully that type of stuff gets overturned. Now, there are several good things. I don't want to paint that everything in here is 100% wrong, because a lot of these things in here are actually pretty good. Promoting awareness, part B, promoting awareness regarding existence, causes, and gravity of threats posed. More education about how cybercrime works is probably a good thing. So I agree with that. I liked part D, encouraging service providers to take effective measurements where feasible in light of national circumstances and extent permitted to strengthen the security. As long as we're strengthening security and preventing people from getting in there, that's good. As long as those security preventions also prevents the government from getting their dirty hands in there as well. Once again, if they want to do a court-ordered warrant or something, fine, but it shouldn't be something easy to do. E, recognizing the contributions of the legitimate activities of security researchers. This one is one of those loopholes that definitely needs to be closed in this country, where if I identify some key problem and you don't like me, well, you could just accuse me of hacking, whereas all I'm doing is demonstrating a hole in your system. Most of the time, this is a lot of times resolved with bug bounties and things like that, but this is ratifying that a little bit more. And then was it I? Undertaking specific tailored efforts to keep children safe online, including through education and training, raising public awareness of CSAM. Again, I think this is more the purview of parents. One of the big challenges with this is it's all about education. Education doesn't solve problems. We are not academic beings. We are emotional beings first and foremost. Okay, that's the truth. So you can teach a kid all you want about drugs. Why do all these kids fall into drugs? Well, because it feels good. Okay, so when you're looking at some of these factors, yes, education is important, but I think it's probably better if we educate maybe the parents to keep your children off the internet. But that is some of the basics of the things that I had an issue with. Now, there are some serious detractors for this. Cisco is concerned a little bit about this. They have a blog post in August indicating that this needs a second look. Their biggest hang-up is actually mostly dealing with human rights. Nothing in this document does a lot for human rights. Just that one article mentions human rights, and 25 countries want to remove that, which is very interesting. It also fails to address basic uses of privacy. Rather than specifically focusing on hacking and cybercrimes, the UN Convention broadly aims at the misuse of computer networks to disseminate objectionable information. This represents a misalignment with values of free speech and liberal democracies, which should be addressed via an amendment before the UN Convention is taken up by member states for adoption. So they're concerned with human rights and they're concerned with privacy elements. They also mentioned that it fails to respect the dissemination of information that might be objectable to some governments. So in a video not too long ago, I had mentioned about, it is important that we follow the laws where we can. And people pointed out, rightly so, that, things that are lawful here in America are not lawful in other places. In places which are Muslim controlled, for example, dissemination of Christian resources is generally against the law. And is that a human right? Well, in Article 6.2 addresses you can't declare some dissemination of religious material as a crime, where they want to take that out in many instances. Most of those nations that have wanted to remove that are nations that do not want you disseminating information about religious matters. And so we have this conflict between laws in organizations where we are conflicted over the elements of what is lawful in one place is not lawful in another. And so we have to address some of these issues. It's kind of like in State College, where my home base is, there is an organization called City Church. I will not affiliate with any of the churches inside City Church. The reason is, in order to have all of these people with all these radically different views come together in quote unquote unity, they end up having to compromise elements that are clearly taught in the Bible, of which I would personally believe. And for that reason, if you go to one of their joint service sermons, they have to wash out everything that is based on the Bible. And that's really what they do. And so I just don't want any association. Well, we get the same thing here. If you have these countries find certain elements oppressive and these countries find certain elements free speech, you now have an automatic conflict where you have to disintegrate to the least common denominator of all of them. And you have to wash out everything and get rid of everything, meaning more things become more criminalized in more places. And you're facilitating the data transfer for prosecuting people based on opinions that they have. And that is what the biggest problem is. And that's really where the EFF gets, Electronic Frontier Foundation. They actually have done a number of articles against this one. This one is from July, written by Karen Gullo, I think. And what their biggest hang-up is over here is failure to address the human rights. And so looking at this, they fail to address the human rights. They fail to address the legal oversight and transparency. So now this article, I think, is in need of a little bit of editing. I think that they have, I think these were supposed to be bullet points, not paragraph lines. So I'll read them, but just understand, I think these are supposed to be bullet points because they clear themselves up at the bottom. Article was not well written, or at least not well published. We'll say it that way. Safeguards like prior judicial authorization for judges' approval of surveillance before it happens, ensuring the measure is legitimate, necessary, and appropriate. You see, that's an incomplete sentence. Notifying individuals when their data is being accessed gives them the opportunity to challenge requests they believe are disproportionate or unjust. Additionally, requiring states to publish statistical transparency reports can provide a clear overview of surveillance activities. These safeguards are not just legal formalities. They are vital for upholding. So that, as you read it, didn't make a lot of sense. But the next paragraph actually clarifies that, and that's why I think these are supposed to be bullet points. This paragraph clarifies what all those meant. Unfortunately, the draft is severely lacking in these protections. So those are all things that need protected. You need to have a judge's oversight before you're engaging in surveillance. This is old classic wiretapping. This is why we need solid warrants before you're seeking a company like Microsoft to ask all the information there. We need a solid warrant, a solid sign-off, and the person needs to be made aware of it, period. Now, that's even lacking in the United States, but some countries don't have any of that at all. They'll just throw you in jail if they don't like you. Well, hence Telegram, right? We will now cooperate now that you threw our CEO in your prison. Okay, then. All right. So the draft fails to have judges' oversight. It fails to notify when data is being transferred over. It fails to have transparency reports for the government. So we don't know what information is being collected. We don't know whom it's being collected by, and we don't know why it's being collected. And there's no sign off on any warrant. And that is completely missing in this document. And that is completely true. So it also allows for an open-ended collection and storage of data. So this article is from September 26, written by, is it Catitza Rodriguez? Okay. And so this one here is a little bit updated from the recent publishes that has happened more recently. But the biggest challenge that they had mentioned down here is the lack of, they had a lack of any oversight on data collection. They wanted nation states to be able to collect data and store data in perpetuity, which means that you're collecting all bunch of data and you're getting it all sorted and organized and searchable, even thanks to the help of AI and such. So now you go, this guy's becoming a problem. He keeps on publishing articles about switching to Linux and getting rid of Windows. Let's type this guy's name in and just see the archive of data that never red flagged anything before, but let's go well into the past and see what we can find. You know, that whole adage of show me the man, I'll show you the crime, that type of stuff, you know. And so looking at these, they have failed to address any of that. And what they're trying to do now instead is they're trying to get all the data being stored forever. And as they are attempting to do so, they're not focusing on the human rights element at all. They also say that the treaty allows intrusive practices. We already mentioned the data retention. They also mentioned the failure to allow encryption or protect encryption. And it assumes that all nation states are acting in good faith. And that's really the fundamental problem here. The convention's underlying flaws is the assumption that in accommodating all countries' practices, states will act in good faith. Up here they mention nothing in the convention prevents a state from employing encryption breaking powers they have under their domestic law when responding to cross-border requests. So if you're not allowed to break encryption in the United States, but you are in UK, which is what they're desperately trying to get to right now, well, they can just take this encrypted blob, send it over UK, let the UK intelligence and share it over. This is why I mentioned that this UN is effectively expanding the Five Eyes far beyond everything else. And so the treaty does not actually act in good faith towards those elements. Of course, the Biden administration says, this is a great thing. I think he actually said, this is a great thing. But I'm not really sure. And so they did actually come by. The convention is first piece of legally binding legislation from the UN. That's not the part I want to see. U.S. officials confirmed there had been consultations with the allied states. They reviewed hundreds of written submissions from NGO organizations and ultimately decided to remain in consensus. So a whole bunch of non-government organizations, you know, those are the shadowy bureaucracy hiding behind the scenes that loves abusing powers and handing over data to the government. And when an NGO is involved, we probably want to run the other direction. But all these NGOs are like, this is great, government. Sign off. This is awesome. Because they want this data and they want to have a precipice to collect this data, not just in the United States, but worldwide. That is what we're trying to see. And so what ended up happening is the United States actually signed off on it. However, it's not entirely signed off. I think my articles are out of place. That's why I'm missing my words here. The United States decided to, senior administration officials speaking anonymously under the condition of briefing reporters said on Sunday night ahead of the anticipated United Nations motion on the treaty Monday that the U.S. decided to remain with the consensus. So, and they support the treaty moving forward. This is even though there are a lot of privacy concerns within it and there are a lot of issues. Now, this is not immediately United States signing on because in order for United States to sign off on this, it must pass the Senate by a 2/3 majority. And so there is still hope, especially we got Ron Wyden in there, and he is obviously is not a huge fan of this type of thing. This article here I actually wanted to include because they had an excellent quote from, it says Democratic senators. I'm not sure exactly who this is, but I love this quote. And it says it could legitimize efforts by authoritarian countries to censor and surveil internet users and political activists. While the executive branch's efforts to steer this treaty in a less harmful direction are commendable, more must be done to keep the convention from being used to justify such actions, the senator said in a joint letter. And so a number of senators are concerned about it, primarily your Democratic senators. Of course, we just took voted in a Republican majority, but I don't think it's enough of a Republican majority that would sign off. Hopefully, the United States would not sign off. However, data policies and protections is one area that the Republican Party is woefully inadequate at handling. And so that is a little bit disconcerting. However, you know, I tend to agree with them on many other elements. However, that is what there is. Now, I want to conclude this by mentioning a few things, talking about what can we do about it. First and foremost, to get this to not be a UN matter, we can let our representatives know in the House and in the Senate that this is not something we should be signing off on. And so really that's the only thing we can do on this front. If this were to pass, well, we just have to take those extra precautions and suggestions, but really it's nothing different we would do because the United States is becoming this authoritarian as it is anyway. And so what do we do in reality? We do the things that I've always suggested. Number one, we need to stop using services that collect our data to hand it over, right? So if the data is not there, there's nothing to hand over. You might say, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. Well, not right this second, but depending on who gets into office next. I mean, half the country right now thinks that Adolf Hitler reincarnated just got into office. Half this country thinks the savior has just gotten into office. And in 4 years, because right now presidents tend to flip-flop every few years, in 4 years, then we will have a new spawn of Hitler in and or a new spawn of Satan in or a new, we don't know. And this is why Snowden always talked about this turnkey government. United States government is very fickle. It changes and flip-flops very rapidly. What you're doing right now may not be illegal right now, but it might be illegal next week or next year or next term. This is why the overturning of Roe versus Wade, in my opinion, was a very good thing for what I teach about with privacy, because people said, well, if they can track when I went to the abortion clinics, then this is a bad thing. And it got people who weren't otherwise thinking about privacy to now think about privacy. And I think that that is a positive thing, because I don't care who the government in charge is. I don't care if they're on the right or to the left. I don't want any authoritarian government, and I don't want any person getting caught up in an authoritarian government. So if I can help you on the left avoid authoritarian government just as much as I can help you on the right, that's why I take that stance. We need to stop using the services that collect our data. I mentioned Windows earlier. Windows 10 is trying to harvest and collect data. It's trying to encrypt your drive and put your encryption keys in their cloud. It's trying to collect a bunch of data. It's trying to make sure you're always logged in so it can always see and access the data. If you're logged in, if you're using Windows the way they want you to use Windows, you're going to be using the Edge browser. The Edge browser on setup wants you to log into not only just Microsoft account, but also Google. The Edge web browser wants you to sign into 2 major data harvesting companies. And when you're signed into those 2 accounts, both of those companies can collect everything you do on that web browser. You go to that web browser and you search something up. It doesn't matter what it is. You search up how to get rid of this fungus. Both Microsoft and Google will have access for as long as they want the data that says, hey, how do you get rid of this fungus? And this is the type of thing they're doing. Of course, on the Windows account, Microsoft is trying to get you to sign in so it can sync your files to the clouds and do all these different things. You want to avoid such services. Generally, limit accounts online. Okay, you don't want to have all of these online accounts online, especially if you have to have an online account. You don't want to be signed in on that online account because they can track you around. They'll use the tracking cookies and see where you are going. You want to avoid big tech email and other services. If you're using Gmail or you're using Yahoo or you're using Outlook, these are services that are collecting, harvesting, and utilizing that data. Proton is a good one. StartMail might be a good one. Tuda might be a good one if you're looking for having an email you don't have to manage. I personally just have my own email servers. It makes things a little bit better. Will I be caught up in a little bit? Obviously, yes, because other people use Gmail accounts. But just maintain control over your own devices. This is why Linux is the best option, why free and open source software is the best option, and why utilizing offline resources is the best option. These are the things that keep your what you're doing with your computer systems offline. Talking about your phone, I've been using Graphene OS. By the way, if you watch my stream on Friday, after doing a bunch of software updates and patching some things, I'm back onto the Graphene OS phone. It seems to be working well. We'll see if that works. But you can always use Lineage, and you can do some security hardening of that. There's things you can do to prevent these organizations from collecting, harvesting, and storing your data so they don't have anything to hand over when somebody comes knocking because, you know, you made a mean tweet on the internet or something. And so those are the types of things that I would recommend that you do. And so with those types of things, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, if you like this type of content, let me know you like this video in the comments down below. Leave us a like as well. And with that, I'm going to leave you a video you can check out now on how you can get started on switching to Linux.